when a good Samaritan tries to do the right thing,
I'm gonna follow the guy.
They were hiding something.
he puts himself in grave danger.
They wanted me for blood. I thought these guys have a gun. I was scared for my life.
I was angry because we're newly engaged.
And later, a brazen crime results in an unbelievable mix-up
Everybody thought it was him.
It has been freaking everyone out.
and leaves a whole city in shock.
That will make you wonder if what you just saw was indeed real.
Friday, August 9th, 2019, Pomona, California. Nonprofit leader Amos Young is on his way to work and is driving past Freeway 60 on Town Avenue when he sees something suspicious. He decides to make a U-turn to take a closer look.
He observed what appeared to be a group of people unloading something in an area that's known to have problems in the city of Pomona.
It's concerning. I feel like something isn't right.
This area, which is about maybe a quarter-mile long, we're always dealing with the calls for illegal dumping, and it's a never-ending process of maintaining control.
In California, illegal dumping, disposing of garbage, waste, or other matter on public or private property is a crime. So Amos decides to record on his cell phone as 3 men haul items off a truck and through a hole in a chain-link fence.
I didn't know what was inside the containers, but I could smell it wasn't anything good. And that alone brought me to pause for a moment. They seemed like they were hiding something and afraid to be seen.
The men are not happy that Amos stopped to record them, so one of them starts recording him.
He whips out his phone in the same moment, like, I see you and you see me, and I really don't want you here because now I have you on video filming me. And this starts to escalate really quickly.
He pulled out his phone. My concern was that he was calling in some of his buddies from the neighborhood to come to the spot because of whatever he was hiding.
With his eyes locked on Amos, the man marches right up to his car.
At first, I really thought he was just walking over to have a conversation. But then you realize he wanted to fight.
This is scary. The man is clearly furious that Amos has interrupted his plans.
You can see it in his face. He wants his crime to go as seamlessly as possible. And now Amos is throwing a wrench in that plan.
He gets very, very upset. He comes up, comes after my driver's door, starts punching, kicking, erratically trying to get inside of the car, pulled on my door handle to try to get to me. There was very little that I could do other than be concerned about making sure that I made it home alive.
Shaken, Amos dials 911.
Hey, you're in Pomona, right?
Yeah. I'm at town just before the 60 freeway. A guy walked up to my car and started banging, kicking my car. Looks like they're doing some illegal dumping as well.
Amos doesn't know who these men are or why one of them is attacking him, but he knows he's in danger.
It's unknown what's inside the vehicle. It's unknown if these suspects are on parole, probation, armed with guns or knives.
If I didn't keep my cool, it could turn violent. It already was a level of violence. So I had to keep my cool.
But his attacker is just getting started.
This guy's coming at me with a cement block. I'm terrified.
Stunned, Amos carefully backs his car away from the scene, all the while continuing to relay every detail to 911.
It's a red SUV Durango.
At that point, I pulled forward to get a better look at the license plate.
It hasn't left yet. Plate is 108R. 108R.
For a split second, Amos thinks this is it. He'll never see his family again.
That rock striking any person could kill them instantly.
I was scared that that cement block was gonna come through the glass and I was gonna die. I was scared for my life. I realized at that point, this guy really is not playing.
They just took a brick to my car.
I can't hold back. I owe too much to those that have come before us to clean up our streets. He tries to get away. So I began following this guy, following the truck, and making sure that police knew every second of where they were headed.
What's your name, sir?
Amos Young. The vehicle's making a right on Marketplace.
I thought to myself, what if police do not arrive on time? And what am I gonna do?
And Amos still doesn't know if the men are armed.
There was a moment where I stopped and thought, these guys have a gun. These guys have a gun.
Amos is risking further harm just by following these men. What if they were leading him to a secluded location where they would hurt him?
Recognizing that I was by myself and being in a city where oftentimes it may take a while for assistance to arrive, I felt all alone.
Then the truck he is chasing suddenly makes a drastic move.
So I'm driving, following. All of a sudden, one door opens, bang, bang, bang. That's what I was expecting at that moment. I thought this guy's gonna come back and he's gonna shoot me. Worst case scenario, all three of these men were gonna get out of that car and come after me. The number one thing was to make sure that they could not get inside of my vehicle.
But instead of coming after him, the man bolts out of sight.
The suspect got out, and the other guys that were in the vehicle continued on. So the suspect looks like he's going to be running westbound back towards Town Avenue.
Drew, where are you? Where is the suspect? Was it parked? What does the person look like?
Where is he running? And where are the other two men in the truck headed now?
Where's the driver?
The driver took off.
They could have kicked him out as a way to say, we don't want to go down with you. Or he could have jumped out on his own and said, let me run because I don't want to get caught.
The two men in the truck drive off, so Amos focuses his attention on the man on foot, the one who tried to kill him.
He is now running westbound, Town and the 60, correct?
Yes. I'm going to follow the guy who actually hit my car and not the suspect vehicle.
That's the guy I gotta go after. I let the car go. My number one concern was stopping the attacker from attacking someone else. At this moment, I'm seeing this guy run, jump, climb over walls, about to access the freeway, and I'm like, this is gonna be bad. This guy's gonna get away.
The suspect was able to disappear, and he no longer had a visual on him.
With his attacker out of sight, Amos pulls into a nearby parking lot to wait for the police. After he shows them his video of the attack, it doesn't take them long to figure out who is behind it.
Within hours, they fingerprinted my entire car, had enough prints to match whom they believed it was.
The man, 26-year-old Jacob McQuana, has an active warrant for felony vandalism.
My attacker was known to police. Police, along with others in the community, worked day and night to find him.
Our undercover task force officers were relentless to solve the crime.
The video Amos took is posted on social media and quickly goes viral. Most people applaud him, but a few warn him that he should have minded his own business.
I'm being told by people, you're a snitch, you're this, you're that. You can't be doing that. That's dangerous.
The ordeal leaves Amos and his family on edge.
I was concerned every single day. I brought in family and friends to walk with me, go to the barber shop with me, to go out with me and eat, because I still had to live. And I wasn't gonna let this one attack keep me from enjoying the beauty of my community that I do love.
He actually became a little more attached. Everywhere I went, he wanted to go. And everywhere we went, his eyes are on everything and everybody, more than usual. When I saw the video, there were a lot of emotions going on. I felt anger. I was angry at Amos first. Because to me, we're newly engaged. We plan to have a family together. So I'm thinking, come home. Like, don't put yourself in the position to be hurt and not come home to your family. But then the emotions of being proud flooded in. I'm very proud yet still edgy. Because he has such a big heart, and I don't want his heart to get in the way of his safety.
But Amos is determined to keep speaking out about the incident.
I and so many others will not allow our community to be degraded by any criminal.
Amos wanted to make a difference. He risked his vehicle, he risked his life to stop dumping in the city of Pomona. Everybody wants to clean up their communities. They want to make them safer.
And on August 21st, after almost 2 weeks of hiding from the police, Jacob McQuana turns himself in.
In the end, the pressure just became too much, where he couldn't escape anymore.
McQuana is charged with assault with a deadly weapon, felony vandalism, and throwing an object at a moving vehicle with intent to cause great bodily injury.
He was sentenced to 1 year in state prison. He served half time and was released early.
While Amos is uneasy knowing his attacker is back on the streets, he knows he did the right thing.
We need to stop senseless attacks like this from taking place. The buck stops here. It's about being a good neighbor.
In Ohio, a woman decides to be a good neighbor by turning in her own boyfriend.
Tonight, we actually show you a stunning local case that will make you scratch your head a little bit and wonder if what you just saw was indeed real.
March 2010, Cincinnati, Ohio. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Office responds to a bank robbery. And this isn't an isolated incident.
The Cincinnati area had experienced a series of bank robberies. The first string occurred in March and April of 2010.
Whoever is behind them, this robber isn't getting away with much.
Probably less than $15,000 out of all of the robberies. It wasn't a whole lot. I mean, they don't keep that much cash around for this reason.
But the rash of robberies leaves employees terrified.
You got a guy who's threatening you, saying he's got a gun.
On the other side of the counter, on the other side of the glass, those tellers don't know what the robber is capable of, what his intention is. That kind of thing can cause quite a bit of fear and anxiety. All they want to do is just do their job and go home. They don't want to get injured or killed just because somebody decides they're going to rob the bank.
As they try to figure out who is responsible for the robberies, police are only sure of one thing. This is almost certainly the same guy.
They all have one thing in common: the same suspect. He looks exactly the same in every single video. It's a black guy wearing a hood, sunglasses, and he's here to rob the place.
In hopes of identifying him, police released the security videos to the local news.
Police released these photos of the suspect.
They put his photo all over the media. It was all over the news.
He held up multiple tri-state banks, and the surveillance video hit probably every newscast in Cincinnati.
Crime Stoppers is a tip hotline with these pictures. They got many, many calls.
Tipsters tell the police who they believe the suspect was.
Soon, police have a firm ID. They believe the robber is this man, Christopher Askew.
So many people identified Christopher as the wrongdoer. So the police went to his mother's house and they knocked on the door and his mom answered and she said, "I know why you're here. I saw him on TV. He's up in Michigan."
They're greeted by his mother, who immediately assumes that they're there to collect her son because she too thought that the video looked like her son.
He ultimately got arrested in Michigan.
So for law enforcement, mom turning her son in sounds like they got the guy. I mean, you would think that a mother knows her own son or what he's capable of.
Police are convinced they have their guy.
Multiple witnesses and bank associates picked Askew out of a lineup and pointed him out as the suspect.
So at this point, this is an open and shut case. The bandit has been caught. He's been identified by witnesses at multiple locations, caught on CCTV footage, even turned in by his own mother.
Police charge Askew with the robberies. But just when they think this is a closed case, there's a game-changing development.
They get a call from a woman who claims that they got the wrong guy. She says, it's actually my boyfriend.
If she's right, it means police have a huge problem on their hands.
They arrested the wrong guy.
The real guy was probably kicked up on his couch, living easy with $15,000 in his pocket, thinking he got away with it.
And that isn't all. This case has a shocking twist.
Really spooked a lot of people out.
It's something you would see in a Hollywood movie.
The woman claims her boyfriend is the real bank robber, but that doesn't make any sense because her boyfriend looks nothing like the man police have in custody.
He's actually a white man.
The guy was this Conrad Zadaric. I think he had been in the country a couple of years. He's Eastern European.
When police go to Conrad's home, his girlfriend shows them exactly why she's so certain he is the right bank robber. He has a pile of cash that is covered in red ink, which comes from the dye packets that banks hide in money in case they get robbed.
One of the red dye packets exploded on him. He was using fingernail polish remover to try to get it off. Basically, they found all the evidence they needed.
But that's not all police find. They also recover the mask that Conrad used to disguise himself during the robberies.
Not just any mask, a $1,000 Hollywood mask of a black man.
A Hollywood-grade, full head covering latex mask that hid the fact that the suspect was not a black male, as the mask would indicate, but a skinny white guy.
It looked absolutely nothing like him, wore sunglasses to cover up his blue eyes, put on gloves and some long sleeves and said, I'm gonna go rob a couple banks today.
He bought it, used it, committed these robberies. And I gotta tell you, this is something we've never seen before. And we handle a lot of cases, but I've never had a theatrical mask used during a series of robberies. And it was so lifelike.
The news anchor that covered this actually propped it up on the desk in the studio.
And we want to show you something. The prosecutor let us borrow this. This is the mask used in that crime. It has been sitting at my desk now for about a week, freaking everyone out.
This mask moved with the movements of the face and the head.
That behaves in such a way that it mimics flesh and muscle. So even when he talked, it looked like a real person.
Really spooked a lot of people out about how absolutely accurate and lifelike this mask looked. Christopher Askew, the initial suspect in this case, looked remarkably similar to what turned out to be a mask.
The story about the creepy mask quickly goes viral.
It's unbelievably lifelike. And the poor guy who just happened to look like it did nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing wrong.
But for all the effort Conrad put into getting the elaborate mask, he apparently didn't pay as much attention to his girlfriend.
He angers his girlfriend, who dimes him out to the police.
That's the one person he should have been nice to after he told her he committed all these robberies. I think she was probably mad at him, but she was more shaken that an innocent person was arrested. And good for her. Christopher was innocent of these robberies.
With the new evidence, witnesses from the banks realize they've been duped, and Christopher Askew is released.
We got Christopher out of jail. Our job is to seek justice, and it was unjust for Christopher to remain in jail a moment longer.
I'm sure when he got out, he felt vindicated, but if I were him, I think I'd be pretty upset with my mom.
Everybody thought it was him, mom included. But if you see the mask, you understand just how lifelike this thing is. It's like they used Christopher for the model for the mask. I mean, it looks just like him.
Since being wrongfully accused, Christopher has stayed out of the spotlight. The police say this case dramatically highlights why eyewitness accounts are not always right.
We've known for a long time that eyewitness testimony can be very, very shaky.
Those are still very valuable tools. Witness accounts of what happened The real lesson here, though, is that those things all by themselves are not as valuable as you may think.
Conrad is charged with 6 counts of robbery.
Once he was found in possession of the mask and they piled on his girlfriend's testimony, Conrad was pretty much done.
Pled guilty to these robbers and is serving a 25-year sentence in one of the Ohio penitentiaries. He's going to be close to 60 when he gets out of prison, but it's scary to think that someone could buy a theatrical mask, misidentify an innocent person.
To this day, police remain stunned by the case. And not just because of that mask.
I think the lesson in this case is don't piss off your girlfriend because she could turn you in on all the robberies.
If you're gonna buy a prosthetic mask, steal a couple $1,000s, maybe buy something nice for your girlfriend. Otherwise, she'll turn you in.
Get out here now!
A violent robbery.
They had bags tied over their faces.
Puts an employee's life in danger.
He had the fear of God in his eyes.
Get in the back, please!
And police on edge.
Are they going to shoot their way out of this?
No. It's absolutely terrifying.
Hands up, go!
And later, when a young woman is stalked in her own home.
In the middle of the night, I saw this random notebook on my couch.
Someone had been coming into her unit.
There's a terrifying confrontation.
Please get out of my apartment.
Is he here to kidnap her? Is he here to assault her?
I'm thinking I'm dead.
July 17th, 2019, Streetsboro, Ohio.
911, where's your emergency?
Verizon next door is getting robbed.
Verizon's getting robbed, okay.
They had something like bags tied over their faces or something.
This is about as serious as it gets.
Sounds like the individuals are still inside.
A witness who spots thieves going into a store has reported a robbery. As police rush to the scene, surveillance cameras record every move of what looks to be a well-planned hit.
We see 4 people rushing into the store, one after the other, the first one holding a firearm, and then we see duct tape, a tote bag, and even something that looks like a laundry basket.
So they run right to the back of the store and just confront the store clerk right away.
One robber points the gun at the clerk's head and tells him to get down on the ground. And the clerk immediately complied. The other robber starts taping his hands behind his back.
They hit him a couple times. I believe they pistol whipped him one time, the handgun. They tied him up and they were just hitting him and asking him where the money was and how to get into the safe. The clerk is terrified. He honestly thought he was gonna get shot.
The robbers empty the cash register, then try to crack open the safe.
They're opening anything and everything in the back room of the store, and they're looking for whatever they can steal.
Unable to get into the safe, they try a different approach.
By picking him up from the back of the shirt so that it's essentially choking his neck as they lift him up off the ground. That moment must have been absolutely terrifying.
The clerk was trying to explain to them that the safe will not just open right away. There's safety measures in place in the event that a store is robbed.
The clerk tells the robbers that there's a built-in delay before the safe will open, but they don't want to hear it.
There's a 10-minute delay, so they have to wait for it to open, and they're just getting more frustrated.
To the clerk's relief, as he nervously keeps pushing buttons, the police show up.
I end up being the first officer there, so I just announced Streetsboro Police.
Within a couple minutes, we had 3 police officers on scene at that location.
When I was in the doorway, I couldn't see anything in the back. We didn't know how many people were back there, and we didn't know exactly what was going on.
Jason, who is a canine officer, first tries to scare the thieves by threatening to send in his dogs.
Streetsboro Police Canine Unit, I'll send the dog and you'll come out! Get out here now!
This is your final warning. I'm sending my dog and you will be bit.
Come on out!
The robbers definitely heard Officer Mullen.
They were in a panic.
They're looking for a back door, and there is no back door. They're not in control of that building anymore. They are scrambling. They're running around from storage area to bathroom, looking back and forth, back and forth.
In the midst of the confusion, the terrified clerk seizes the opportunity to escape.
He starts running towards me. He had the fear of God in his eyes. As he gets on his knees, I realize that his hands are tied behind his back.
I have an employee bound up. Come on outside. Come outside. Please, they're in the back, please.
The clerk tells police the robbers almost killed him.
They were hitting me in the face right here.
What were they saying when they were doing it?
Just open the safe, open the safe. They weren't believing me because it was a 10-minute time delay safe for this reason. They just weren't believing me, and they said that shoot him.
These robbers are dangerous, and police know they must get to them before someone does get hurt. But this is like walking into a trap.
So we were just staring at a blank wall and couldn't see nothing around it.
Hands up now! Come on out! Come on out!
With the clerk safely outside, police are determined to detain the thieves who threatened to kill him.
The moment the clerk took the opportunity to run out of the store, the robbers really lost their control of the situation. Checkmate. It's over for them.
The police continue yelling as they cautiously move inside.
Hands up now! Come on out! No! Come on out!
It's a very tense moment. We don't know what their intentions are. We don't know how many people there are. We don't know how many weapons there are.
But suddenly, two of the robbers emerge with their hands up.
They're just kind of walking towards us like zombies. We can't see any emotion on them. You can't really tell from their body what's going on. It's a very dangerous moment. Any sudden movement from them, we'd be forced to deal with it.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Anyone else in there?
It would not say anything to us.
The whole time, we are thinking, who else is here? How many guns are there? Are they gonna come for us? Are they just giving up? We don't know.
With two of the bandits now in handcuffs, the officers inch their way towards the back.
It's a very blind corner and you're just slowly edging your way back to see what you can see. When you kind of go around, you're trying to make sure that you're not aiming your gun at someone else.
This is no time to let our guard down.
Pittsburgh Police, is there anybody else back here?
There are closed doors, there's a desk. Officer Herman and I decide to check a door that's right in front of me first.
I'm gonna open it, you're gonna look, okay? I'm gonna keep my eye over there.
I open the door and there's a robber standing in the doorway with his hands up.
Put your hands up, put your hands up. Got another one in the back.
To open a closet and to see a robber with his hands up. He's got cash in his pockets that he just took out of a cash register. Doesn't get more real or surprising than that.
But that's when Officer Hall gets a glimpse of a fourth robber cowering under a desk.
I seen his feet or something was sticking out.
Walk him to the front. Just walk him to the front.
Roll over on your stomach. You don't got the order out, okay?
I'm out of cuffs. I'm out of cuffs.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm giving myself up, yo.
It is pretty pathetic to hide under a desk like that when you come running into a store with such authority and such dominance of really trying to play with someone's life to then be reduced down to hiding under a desk. It kind of looks like they're playing a game of hide and seek, but this isn't a fun one. It's incredibly dangerous.
The police soon determine that they have all the robbers in custody, and that's when they discover exactly how dangerous this situation was.
We found the gun on the table next to where the fourth robber was hiding under the desk. It was a loaded semi-automatic pistol.
It turns out that all four of the suspects are teenagers. Two of them, who are 17, go to prison for armed robbery and kidnapping. The others, who are only 16, are sent to the Ohio Youth Detention Center until they turn 21.
The two that touched the gun were sentenced to prison. The courts decided that your age is not going to play as big of a role as it may had you not touched the gun.
The quick and decisive action of the police earns them big praise.
the police chief is applauding the 911 caller and his officers for stopping these teens within minutes.
They call it luck.
This is the first time I have run into a situation where a store is being robbed and we get there and the person that's robbing the store is still in the store. Why would they still be here?
But it gets them national exposure.
It's very rare that we see the cops show up in time to actually stop a crime, and good for them for doing so.
The Streetsboro officers have to commend them for doing an incredible job being able to apprehend all 4 juvenile suspects.
We're very surprised that the video went viral and that type of thing just doesn't happen here.
It's amazing that in this case, nothing happened, and it is truly a testament to the police who did their work very seamlessly.
As for the store clerk who was tied up by the robbers, who was asked not to be publicly identified, he can't thank the police enough.
He was very traumatized, but he was very appreciative that we were there to save him.
He has told us numerous times that we have saved his life, and he will always be very grateful for us. I don't think any of us here consider ourselves heroes. There are a lot more people out there that are more accepting of that title. I'm very happy that nobody was hurt.
In Maryland, a young woman is saved by the camera on her cell phone.
She was filming a TikTok video when the unthinkable happened.
November 22nd, 2020, Hagerstown, Maryland, 10 p.m. 25-year-old Hannah Viverette is unwinding in her favorite way.
I did a lot of meditation and a lot of dancing, which is also how I release some energy.
As she often does, Hannah is filming herself so she can post her dance on social media.
And I started recording. Now, this was like a good solid 20 minutes.
But then, her night takes a sudden and terrifying turn.
I heard this crack. I immediately knew that it was my balcony door because it made a very distinct noise when it would crack open.
Hannah thinks, oh, it's just the wind, because the door had never been properly repaired. So sometimes when there's a huge gust of wind, the door would creak and come open. She begins to walk towards the door to close it, when all of a sudden it starts to push back open. Hannah lives on the 2nd floor, so it was extremely frightening to her.
Hannah is no longer alone.
As she sees the door begin to push all the way open, that's when she begins to realize there's a guy standing here. There's a guy trying to enter my apartment.
Just so many different emotions. First off, I'm thinking I'm dead.
Who are you? In a panic, Hannah reaches for her phone, which is still recording.
The only reason that I grabbed my cell phone was 911. I take my phone and I flash it at him because I was like, ding, 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 bright idea. I just realized my phone was recording.
So what begins as a social media post actually ends up to be evidence against the stalker who enters her apartment.
Shaking, Hannah screams out.
Who are you? Please get out. Please get out.
She yells at the intruder, shouting at the intruder to get out of her apartment.
Still, she's almost paralyzed with fear.
Is he here to kidnap her? Is he here to assault her? Is he here to murder her?
Whatever he wants, when Hannah gets a better look at his face, she's in shock.
He lived across the street. He lived in the complex.
And this man has always given Hannah the creeps.
If I was on my balcony, he would stop his vehicle in the roadway and he would like shout at me. I never talked to him. I never said a word to him. And he would do his weird, creepy smile. He would just stare and smile at me.
This intruder was a classic stalker. Hannah remembers him, seeing him around the complex, observing that he was watching her, trying to establish Hannah's movements.
Even scarier, it looks like this intruder could be armed.
He had both of his hands in his pockets. and smiling at me and like just mumbling some crap. Please get out. Yes.
She realizes his hands aren't visible. At this point, she's even more frightened. Could it be a knife? Could it be some other weapon?
I was standing at the doorway, and the whole time I'm thinking, he's gonna pull out a gun and shoot me.
This is like a nightmare.
No, please get out.
He says to her, I'm your friend. But it's obvious that his intention here is to harm Hannah.
And Hannah's worst fear is that he wants to kidnap her and take her somewhere else.
That is absolutely when it goes from a dangerous situation to a deadly situation.
Hannah is desperate to escape the frightening intruder.
She's slowly transitioning from her shock into a position where she can take control of the situation.
The man keeps insisting that he's Hannah's friend.
She's like, I'm not your friend, I don't know you. And as she says so, she begins to back out of her doorway.
With her phone in hand, Hannah makes a bold escape.
Please get out of my apartment right now.
Running to a neighbor's apartment.
Hello? Please come in.
Thankfully, her neighbor heard her yell and came to the door.
That's when the man finally retreats.
As Hannah begins to run, he begins to exit just how he came, from the balcony.
As soon as I got into my neighbors, I ended that recording and dialed 911.
Hello, this is the 911 operator.
While she waits for the police, Hannah remembers something that gives her chills.
And I'm piecing things together, realizing all the sketchy that has happened, that I have been having a really weird feelings. I used to come home in the middle of the day and there would be like random pieces of paper.
She'd come home and see that her personal belongings had been moved around. It was almost as if someone had been coming into her unit, hanging out, and then leaving.
Most disturbing is a small, unfamiliar book she once found next to her couch.
I went to bed one night and I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw this random notebook lying on my couch. So I look at this notebook, I take pictures of it. Thank God I took pictures of it. It's got like names and checklists. So I'm like, who the is in my apartment?
At the time, Hannah tries to dismiss it, thinking maybe someone from maintenance left it there during the day. But police believe the incidents are related. And soon, they identify a suspect, Angel Rodriguez Gomez, a former handyman at the complex.
Angel was the same name as the guy's name on the cover of that maintenance log that she found.
Top of the notebook, clear as day, says prepared by Angel.
As a maintenance worker, his job was to go into each person's unit to repair items. So as a result, he had the ability to enter and leave any unit throughout the complex.
Of course, not all maintenance and landscaping people are nefarious criminals. However, those that are have the opportunity to become familiar with you, with your environment, with your residence, with the layout, and even later on, possibly even an avenue of escape. This person, as a maintenance employee, had unparalleled opportunity to enter that home.
I felt so violated. It was disgusting. So much anxiety and fear.
Angel is charged with stalking, burglary, second-degree assault, and malicious destruction of property.
One of the most frightening things about the ordeal is that it was discovered that Angel was wielding a knife. He used a knife to cut her Christmas light that she had decorating the bars of her second floor balcony.
He cuts a section of Christmas lights and brings them with him as he enters the apartment. For what? Any action performed before and related to any kind of offense or any kind of crime can establish the intent later on during the investigation.
What's more, Hannah doesn't seem to be the only person Angel has targeted. Other residents in her complex also come forward with disturbing stories about him. They thank Hannah for getting him arrested, but then something shocking happens.
The suspect got out on bail, Bail obviously is not a punitive measure because you're innocent until proven guilty. Bail is only there to ensure that the suspect shows up for the court proceeding later on. But in cases like this, what it did was put a potentially dangerous suspect back out on the street.
Like nothing happened and then get out and just walk. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. No freaking way.
Hannah was informed by her complex that Angel would be given 30 days notice to leave. 30 days notice was ridiculous.
Knowing that her stalker is still in her apartment complex is horrifying for Hannah.
We all know that when someone has a pending case against you where you could be facing life in prison, the best way to get rid of a case is to get rid of the witness. I was terrified for Hannah's safety.
I was so pissed off. I'm like, you can't be for real right now. He's not gonna get away with this.
That's when Hannah decides to take her story public.
New details emerging tonight after a woman recording a TikTok video spotted an intruder breaking into her apartment.
I ended up posting this to my Facebook, my personal Facebook, and my Instagram account, and TikTok. 17 hours later, it's had like 1.1 million likes.
Hannah's video also catches the attention of immigration officials.
ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, discovered Angel was not a U.S. citizen.
He is promptly arrested again and is now awaiting trial. In the meantime, Hannah has taken up martial arts,
which has been freaking amazing. You know, I'm gonna feel a lot more better putting my head down on my pillow at night.
And Hannah just hopes her story will inspire other women to always protect themselves.
I'm just so grateful that I'm able to share this with so many people.
On the morning of February 10th, 1990, the city of Las Cruces, New Mexico, was preparing for what should have been an ordinary Saturday. Families would soon be looking for somewhere to spend the weekend together. Children would laugh as bowling balls rolled slowly down polished lanes. Parents would gather around snack counters, and employees would settle into another routine day of work. Nothing about that winter morning suggested that it would become one of the darkest chapters in the history of the American Southwest. Yet within a span of roughly 15 minutes, a familiar neighborhood bowling alley became the scene of an atrocity so shocking that it continues to haunt investigators, survivors, and an entire community more than 3 decades later. Even today, despite years of investigation, thousands of interviews, and countless hours devoted to examining every available clue, the identities of the 2 men responsible remain unknown. The Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre has become more than a criminal investigation. It has become a symbol of unanswered questions, unimaginable loss, and the painful reality that justice sometimes remains just beyond reach. The crime took place at Las Cruces Bowl, a popular family bowling center located at 1201 East Amador Avenue in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Unlike places associated with violence or criminal activity, the bowling alley was designed for recreation. It was a place where birthdays were celebrated, leagues competed throughout the year, and families gathered during weekends. It represented normal life, a place built around routine and community rather than danger. That contrast is one of the reasons the case continues to disturb those who study it. Violence occurring in a location already associated with risk is one thing. Violence invading a place where children played and families relaxed creates a different kind of horror. According to the known facts, sometime between approximately 8:20 and 8:35 that Saturday morning, 2 unidentified men entered the bowling alley before it officially opened for business. The employees were still preparing for the day ahead. Customers had not yet begun arriving. The building was quiet, occupied only by a handful of workers and several children who happened to be with them. What happened next unfolded rapidly, but its consequences would extend across decades. Investigators later determined that the 2 men committed an armed robbery. One of them carried a .22 caliber handgun, while the other assisted in controlling the victims. Their initial objective appeared to be theft rather than immediate violence. They forced employees into the office and demanded access to the safe. Approximately $4,000 to $5,000, consisting largely of cash and checks from the previous day's business, was taken. In another robbery that might have marked the end of the crime, the offenders could have left the building, disappeared into the morning, and escaped with the stolen money. Instead, something far more horrifying occurred. After obtaining the money, the gunman ordered every person inside the office to lie on the floor. There was no evidence that the victims resisted. There was no indication of a struggle or an attempt to fight back. Yet the robbers began shooting anyway. Investigators would later conclude that the victims were deliberately targeted at close range. Many suffered gunshot wounds to the head and upper body, evidence suggesting that the gunman intended to eliminate every witness who could later identify them. The brutality did not stop there. Before leaving, the offenders gathered paper inside the office and deliberately started a fire, apparently attempting to destroy evidence and further complicate the investigation. The fire damaged the crime scene, but failed to consume it completely. It was an act that transformed an already devastating crime into an even more difficult mystery, destroying potential evidence while leaving investigators with countless unanswered questions. The human cost of those few minutes was almost impossible to comprehend. 7 people were shot. 5 would ultimately lose their lives. 3 of those victims were children, the youngest only 2 years old. 1 victim survived the initial attack, but later died from complications related to the injuries sustained during the shooting years afterward. 2 people survived the massacre itself, carrying physical and emotional scars that would remain long after the news cameras departed and public attention shifted elsewhere. Among the most remarkable moments in the entire case came immediately after the attackers fled. One of the survivors, 12-year-old Melissa Repass, had been shot 5 times. Despite severe injuries and significant blood loss, she somehow managed to crawl across the office toward a telephone. Around 8:30 that morning, she placed a desperate call to 911. That call became one of the defining moments of the tragedy. It alerted emergency responders before the fire could spread further and before the remaining survivors succumbed to their injuries. Without that extraordinary act of determination, investigators have long believed the death toll could have been even higher. The courage demonstrated by a severely wounded child stands in stark contrast to the senseless cruelty displayed by the attackers. It is one of the few moments of hope found within an otherwise heartbreaking story. Yet even this remarkable act could not answer the most important question that emerged from the crime scene. Who were the 2 men responsible? From the earliest hours of the investigation, detectives understood that they faced an enormously difficult task. The offenders had entered before business hours, committed the robbery quickly, murdered nearly every witness, attempted to burn the office, and disappeared before police arrived. Unlike many modern investigations, there were no useful surveillance cameras documenting their movements. DNA technology in 1990 remained far less advanced than it would become decades later. The attempted arson damaged the scene. While the bowling alley itself naturally contained fingerprints and traces from countless employees, customers, and visitors who had been there before the crime occurred, separating meaningful evidence from ordinary everyday activity would become one of the investigation's greatest challenges. Authorities eventually interviewed more than 2,000 people. They collected fingerprints, shoe prints, shell casings from the .22 caliber weapon, and witness statements from the surviving victims. Those survivors provided descriptions of 2 suspects. One appeared younger, possibly in his late 20s or early 30s. The other appeared significantly older, perhaps in his late 40s or early 50s. Both reportedly spoke fluent English, and both were believed to have Hispanic features. Despite these descriptions and the enormous investigative effort that followed, no arrest has ever been made. The case remains officially unsolved. Over the years, investigators have explored multiple possibilities based on the available evidence. The primary theory suggests that the crime began as a robbery before escalating into mass murder, when the offenders decided to eliminate witnesses. Another possibility considered by investigators is that the offenders possessed prior knowledge of the bowling alley, perhaps understanding where the safe was located when employees arrived, and how many people would likely be present before opening. Some witnesses also raised the possibility that additional assistance may have existed outside the building, although no evidence has conclusively established the presence of an accomplice. None of these theories has produced sufficient proof to identify those responsible. As time passed, the massacre gradually transformed from an active investigation into one of America's most enduring cold cases. The years continued to accumulate, but the central mystery remained unchanged. Families buried loved ones. Survivors rebuilt lives marked forever by trauma. Detectives retired, while new investigators inherited boxes of reports, photographs, and evidence collected decades earlier. Advances in forensic science have periodically renewed hope that forgotten evidence might eventually reveal what traditional investigative methods could not. Yet every anniversary arrives with the same painful reality. The two men who entered Las Cruces Bowl that February morning have never faced trial, never publicly answered for the lives they destroyed, and never been conclusively identified. Crime Stoppers continues to offer a reward for information leading to their identification. A reminder that investigators have never stopped hoping someone, somewhere, still knows the truth. Perhaps that enduring uncertainty is what makes the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre so uniquely haunting. Many notorious crimes leave behind clear narratives, complete with arrests, trials, and verdicts. This case offers none of those conclusions. Instead, it presents a sequence of established facts surrounded by silence. A quiet Saturday morning, a family bowling center preparing to open. Two unidentified men walking through an unlocked door. A robbery that escalated into an execution. A failed attempt to erase the evidence with fire. A 12-year-old girl's desperate call for help. 5 lives ultimately lost. And then, after only a matter of minutes, the attackers vanished, leaving behind a mystery that has endured for more than 3 decades. This is not simply the story of an unsolved crime. It is the story of ordinary people whose lives intersected with extraordinary violence, of investigators pursuing answers that remain frustratingly out of reach, and of a community that continues to wait for the day when the names of 2 unknown men are finally replaced with certainty, accountability, and justice. Long before the violence that would define its place in American criminal history, Las Cruces Bowl was known for something far more ordinary. It was a neighborhood bowling center where people came to enjoy an evening with family, celebrate birthdays, or spend a quiet weekend with friends. Bowling alleys have long occupied a unique place in American communities, serving as gathering spaces where multiple generations often share the same room. Children learn the game while parents watch from nearby tables. Coworkers meet after long work days, and local leagues return week after week to familiar lanes. Las Cruces Bowl reflected that same atmosphere. It was not a place associated with fear or danger. Instead, it represented routine, familiarity, and community. That ordinary setting makes the events of February 10th, 1990, even more difficult to comprehend. Violence did not erupt in an isolated location or during the darkness of night. It entered a family business preparing to welcome customers on an ordinary Saturday morning. The employees who arrived before opening were not expecting confrontation. They were beginning another workday, carrying out responsibilities they had likely performed many times before. Their focus was on preparing the bowling alley for the public, ensuring everything would be ready when the doors officially opened at 9 o'clock. No one inside the building could have anticipated that within minutes, their ordinary routines would be interrupted forever. Among those present that morning was 34-year-old Stephanie Sinek, the day manager. As the individual responsible for overseeing operations before opening, Stephanie occupied a position of trust. Managing a business before customers arrived involved countless routine responsibilities, from preparing financial records to ensuring employees were ready for another day. On this particular morning, one of those ordinary responsibilities would eventually place her directly in the path of two armed robbers. According to investigators, Stephanie would later be forced to open the bowling alley's safe after the attackers entered the building. It was not a decision she made willingly, but one made under the threat of a firearm while attempting to survive an unimaginable situation. Stephanie was not alone that morning. With her was her 12-year-old daughter, Melissa Repass. For many families, bringing a child to work before business hours is an entirely ordinary occurrence, particularly on weekends when school is not in session. Nothing about Melissa's presence suggested anything unusual. She was simply spending time with her mother inside a familiar environment. At 12 years old, she had no reason to believe she would soon become one of the central figures in one of America's most enduring cold cases. Her story would eventually become known not because she sought attention, but because of the extraordinary courage she displayed after suffering devastating injuries. Also present was 13-year-old Amy Hauser, a friend of Melissa. Like countless teenagers spending weekends together, Amy's presence reflected nothing more than an ordinary friendship. The bowling alley offered a safe environment where young people could accompany adults while enjoying each other's company before the day officially began. There is no evidence suggesting Amy expected anything beyond another quiet Saturday morning. Her inclusion among the victims serves as a heartbreaking reminder that chance alone often determines who becomes caught in extraordinary acts of violence. She was not an employee. She was not connected to the robbery in any way. She simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Another employee inside the building was 33-year-old Ida Holwyn, who worked as the bowling alley's cook. Every family entertainment center depends upon individuals whose work often goes unnoticed by customers but remains essential to daily operations. Preparing food before opening was likely another routine task in a familiar environment. According to the investigation, Ida would become one of the first employees confronted after the attackers entered through an unlocked door. She would be forced into the office where the others were gathered, transforming an ordinary workplace into a room from which almost no one would escape unharmed. Ida would ultimately survive the attack, but survival does not erase trauma. Instead, it often leaves individuals carrying memories that remain impossible to forget. At some point during the robbery, another employee unknowingly entered the unfolding crime scene. 26-year-old Stephen Turan worked as the bowling alley's mechanic, responsible for maintaining the complex machinery that kept the lanes operating. On that particular morning, Stephen faced a situation familiar to many working parents. Unable to find childcare, he brought his children with him to work. There was nothing unusual about his arrival. He simply intended to begin another day's responsibilities while caring for his family. Accompanying Stephen were 6-year-old Paula Holwyn and 2-year-old Valerie Turan. Their presence transformed the group inside the office into a heartbreaking cross-section of ordinary life. Adults preparing for work stood alongside children whose only expectation was spending the morning with family. They had no connection to the robbery beyond unfortunate timing. According to investigators, Stephen entered the building unaware that the crime was already underway. Finding no obvious signs of danger outside, he continued inside until he reached the office, where he immediately became another hostage. In a matter of moments, the number of captives inside the room increased dramatically. 3 adults and 4 children now occupied the office together, all under the control of 2 armed men. None of them had planned to be there together. Their presence resulted entirely from routine decisions made on what appeared to be an ordinary Saturday morning. Looking back from the perspective of history, those ordinary choices become deeply tragic. Stephanie came to work because she was responsible for opening the business. Melissa accompanied her mother. Amy spent time with her friend. Ida reported for another workday in the kitchen. Stephen arrived to maintain the bowling equipment, bringing Paula and Valerie because childcare was unavailable. Each decision reflected normal life. None suggested impending danger. Yet together, they formed the complete group that would become trapped inside the office during the robbery. One of the most striking aspects of the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre is that every victim represented ordinary people engaged in ordinary activities. There were no confrontations before the offenders arrived. No evidence indicates anyone provoked violence or resisted the robbery. Instead, investigators concluded that the victims became targets simply because they witnessed the crime. That reality adds another layer of tragedy to the case. The violence appears disconnected from anything the victims did. Their only misfortune was being present when two armed strangers entered the building. Even before the shooting began, the circumstances already reflected overwhelming vulnerability. The building had not yet opened to the public. Only a handful of employees occupied the premises. Children were present because of everyday family circumstances rather than any special event. The attackers entered through an unlocked door, something entirely unsurprising before business hours as employees moved throughout the building preparing for the day ahead. Every element of the setting reflected trust and routine rather than security against violent crime. That trust would be shattered within minutes. The victims never had an opportunity to understand why they had been chosen. The available evidence suggests the robbery unfolded quickly, leaving little time for anyone to process what was happening before events escalated beyond recovery. While investigators later developed theories about the offender's motives, nothing changes the simple reality that 7 innocent people suddenly found themselves trapped together inside one office with 2 armed men whose intentions would soon become horrifyingly clear. As investigators reconstructed the timeline, one detail became especially significant. The robbery itself appeared relatively straightforward. Money was demanded, the safe was opened, and thousands of dollars were taken. Up to that point, the crime resembled countless armed robberies committed across the United States every year. But unlike those robberies, this one did not end when the offenders obtained the money. Instead, the presence of 7 living witnesses, including several children, appears to have transformed the situation into something far more sinister. Whether that decision had been planned in advance or was made in the moment remains unknown. What is known is that every person inside the office suddenly faced a danger far greater than robbery alone. The ordinary morning that had begun with preparations for opening the bowling alley had quietly reached its final moments. Within the office stood a manager, a cook, a mechanic, 3 children, and a young teenager visiting a friend. Outside, the city continued waking to another Saturday, unaware that inside Las Cruces Bowl, one of the most devastating crimes in New Mexico history, was only moments away from reaching its most violent and irreversible chapter. By approximately 8:20 on the morning of February 10th, 1990, the quiet routine inside Las Cruces Bowl was about to be interrupted in a way that no one present could have imagined. The building had not yet opened for business. Employees were still carrying out the final preparations before the first customers would arrive at 9 o'clock. Outside, the Saturday morning appeared entirely ordinary. There was no obvious warning, no indication that within the next several minutes the bowling alley would become the scene of one of the most notorious unsolved mass murders in American history. According to the known facts established during the investigation, 2 unidentified men entered the building through an unlocked door. The unlocked entrance was not unusual. Before opening hours, employees needed to move in and out of the building as they prepared for the day's operations. The attackers did not have to force their way inside. Instead, they simply walked into a workplace where the people inside had every reason to believe they were beginning another ordinary day. Investigators later determined that the two men worked together. One carried a .22 caliber handgun, while the second assisted in controlling the victims. Their coordinated actions suggested that each understood his role from the moment they entered the building. At least initially, the objective appeared to be robbery, rather than immediately opening fire. The two men focused on gaining control of the employees and obtaining access to the bowling alley's money. One of the first people confronted was Ida Holguin, the 33-year-old cook. She had been preparing for another workday when the attackers encountered her. Under the threat of a firearm, Ida was forced away from her normal duties and directed toward the office where the day manager, Stephanie Senak, was already present with her daughter, Melissa Repass, and Melissa's friend, Amy Hauser. Within moments, what had begun as an ordinary workplace became the center of a violent armed robbery. The office was not a place designed to protect people from danger. It was an administrative space where financial records were handled and where the safe containing the business's cash receipts was located. The attackers clearly understood that if they wanted money, this was the room they needed to reach. Once everyone had been gathered together, the robbers turned their attention to Stephanie Senak. As the manager responsible for opening the business, Stephanie possessed access to the safe. Under the immediate threat posed by the armed men, she was forced to comply with their demands. Investigators later concluded that the offenders succeeded in obtaining approximately $4,000 to $5,000. The stolen property consisted primarily of cash and checks, representing revenue from the previous day's business. In purely financial terms, the robbery yielded a relatively modest amount of money. Yet the value of the stolen cash would soon become insignificant compared to the human cost that followed. Up to this point, the events still resembled many other armed robberies committed against businesses before opening hours. The offenders had entered quickly, secured control over the employees, demanded access to the safe, and taken the available money. Had they left immediately afterward, the crime would have remained a serious but fundamentally different case. Instead, the situation became dramatically more complicated because of an event that neither the employees nor, perhaps, even the robbers themselves had anticipated. While the robbery was still unfolding inside the office, Stephen Turan arrived for work. Stephen, 26 years old, served as the bowling alley's mechanic. His responsibilities involved maintaining the machinery that kept the bowling lanes functioning properly. On that particular Saturday morning, however, Stephen faced a challenge familiar to many working parents. He had been unable to arrange childcare. Rather than miss work, he brought his two young daughters with him. 6-year-old Paula Holguin accompanied her father, as did 2-year-old Valerie Turan. Nothing about Stephen's arrival appeared unusual from his perspective. He approached the building expecting another ordinary workday. The bowling alley had not yet opened, and there were no obvious signs outside indicating that anything was wrong. There was no visible struggle, no alarm, and no reason for him to suspect that armed robbers had already taken control of the office inside. Unaware of the danger awaiting him, Stephen entered the building and made his way toward the office. The decision was entirely routine. Employees naturally reported to work before customers arrived, and the office served as a central point for beginning the day's operations. Tragically, the moment Stephen entered the office, he found himself face to face with the unfolding robbery. Investigators determined that he immediately became another hostage. In an instant, the number of victims increased from 4 to 7. The room now contained 3 adults and 4 children, all under the control of 2 armed offenders. This development occupies an important place in later investigative theories. Authorities would eventually suggest that Stevens' unexpected arrival may have significantly influenced the course of the crime. The robbery itself had already succeeded. The money had reportedly been obtained. Yet Stevens' appearance introduced 2 additional witnesses, along with 2 very young children, into an already dangerous situation. Whether the offenders had anticipated anyone else arriving during those minutes remains unknown. Their identities have never been established, and no confession has ever explained their decisions. Nevertheless, investigators consider the possibility that the growing number of witnesses may have affected what happened next. Inside the office, 7 innocent people now shared the same confined space. Stephanie Senak remained under the control of the men who had forced her to open the safe. Ida Holwyn had already been brought into the room after being confronted elsewhere in the building. 12-year-old Melissa Repass and 13-year-old Amy Hauser had been caught in circumstances entirely beyond their control. Stephen Turan had unknowingly walked into the robbery while bringing his daughters to work because he had no childcare. Paula, only 6 years old, and Valerie, just 2 years old, were among the youngest victims ever connected to a crime that investigators would later describe as an execution of witnesses. The contrast between the offenders and the victims could hardly have been greater. On one side stood 2 armed men who had entered the building with the apparent intention of stealing money. On the other stood ordinary employees carrying out everyday responsibilities and children who simply happened to be present because of routine family circumstances. None of the victims had sought confrontation. According to the available evidence, there was no indication of resistance while the robbery unfolded. Their actions reflected cooperation under extreme threat, consistent with individuals attempting to survive an armed encounter. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere inside the office must have become increasingly tense. Even though the exact conversations exchanged between the offenders and their captives remain unknown. To remain faithful to the established facts, investigators have never publicly reconstructed dialogue from those moments. What is known as limited but deeply significant. The money had been surrendered. The victims remained alive. The offenders still controlled the room. At this stage, there remained an opportunity for the robbers to leave the building carrying the stolen cash. Instead, the investigation would later reveal that they made a different decision, one that transformed an armed robbery into a massacre. The office itself became the final location where every victim was gathered together before the shooting began. The room held adults responsible for opening a family business alongside children whose only connection to the events was their presence that morning. The attackers had complete control over the situation. They possessed the weapon. They had already obtained the contents of the safe. Nothing in the available evidence indicates that the victims attempted to interfere with their escape. Yet the robbery was not over. Something changed in those final moments before the gunfire erupted. Whether that decision had been made before entering the building or developed after Stevens' unexpected arrival remains impossible to determine. Investigators can describe only the physical evidence left behind, not the private thoughts of the unidentified offenders. What followed would demonstrate that the objective was no longer simply theft. The events were about to escalate into deliberate violence directed against every witness inside the office. In only a few moments, the quiet administrative room, where employees had begun another ordinary Saturday morning, would become the center of a crime that has remained unsolved for more than 3 decades. The stolen money, amounting to only a few $1,000s, would soon be overshadowed by a far greater loss. The lives of 7 innocent people now depended entirely on the choices of 2 unidentified men, and those choices would forever alter the history of Las Cruces Bowl, leaving behind not only one of New Mexico's most devastating crimes, but also one of America's most enduring mysteries. Inside the office of Las Cruces Bowl, the robbery had already achieved its apparent objective. The safe had been opened under threat, and approximately $4,000 to $5,000, consisting largely of cash and checks from the previous day's business, had been taken. The two unidentified offenders remained in complete control of the room. Around them stood 3 adults and 4 children whose lives had become intertwined by chance rather than choice. None of the victims had entered the building expecting danger. Each had arrived because of the ordinary responsibilities and routines of a Saturday morning. Stephanie Senak had come to open the bowling alley for another day of business. Ida Holwyn was preparing for work in the kitchen. Stephen Turan had reported for his shift as the mechanic, bringing 6-year-old Paula Holwyn and 2-year-old Valerie Turan because he had been unable to find childcare. 12-year-old Melissa Repass was with her mother, while 13-year-old Amy Hauser was spending time with her friend. They represented nothing more than employees and children gathered inside a family entertainment center before opening hours. By every indication available to investigators, they had complied with the robbers' demands. The money had been surrendered. No evidence suggested a struggle, resistance, or any attempt to interfere with the offender's escape. Yet the violence that followed would demonstrate that the robbery was no longer simply about theft. According to the evidence collected during the investigation, the gunman ordered everyone inside the office to lie on the floor. The instruction marked a dramatic turning point in the crime. Until that moment, the events resembled many armed robberies in which victims cooperate in hopes of surviving. Being ordered to the floor may have appeared to offer some possibility that the offenders intended to leave once they believed the victims could not immediately follow them or identify the direction in which they fled. Instead, investigators concluded that the orders served an entirely different purpose. Once the victims were on the floor, the attackers began shooting. The forensic evidence indicated that multiple gunshots were fired at close range. Many of the wounds were concentrated in the head and upper body, leading investigators to conclude that the victims were intentionally targeted in a deliberate effort to eliminate every witness present inside the office. The available evidence does not indicate that the shootings were random or accidental. Rather, the pattern of injuries suggested purposeful execution after the robbery had already been completed. Within moments, the office that had served as an ordinary workplace only minutes earlier became the scene of extraordinary devastation. 7 people had been shot. The violence spared no distinction between adults and children. The youngest victim inside the room was only 2 years old. Another child was 6. 2 girls had entered the building simply to spend part of a Saturday morning together before the bowling alley opened to customers. Every victim became the target of the same relentless attack. Investigators later reconstructed the crime through physical evidence left behind in the office. Although the attempted fire damaged portions of the scene, enough evidence remained to establish the essential sequence of events. The shooting occurred after the robbery had been completed. The victims had been gathered together in one location. The gunfire was delivered at close range. These findings supported the conclusion that the offenders intended to leave behind no witnesses capable of identifying them. The attack was not an impulsive exchange of gunfire during a confrontation. According to the available evidence, it was a calculated act committed against individuals who were already under the complete control of armed offenders. Yet the brutality did not end with the shooting. Before leaving the office, the 2 men attempted to destroy evidence by setting the room on fire. Investigators determined that papers were gathered and ignited inside the office before the offenders fled the bowling alley. The fire damaged the crime scene but failed to consume it entirely. Although the flames complicated the investigation by destroying or altering potential evidence, they were ultimately unsuccessful in erasing everything investigators would later examine. Even so, The attempted arson became another obstacle in what would become one of the most difficult criminal investigations in New Mexico history. It reflected not only an effort to escape detection, but also an apparent awareness that physical evidence inside the office could identify those responsible. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the two offenders left the building. The exact route they took after fleeing remains unknown. Their identities have never been established, and no confirmed account exists describing where they went immediately afterward. Within only a matter of minutes, they disappeared, leaving behind 7 critically wounded victims inside an office that had begun to fill with smoke from the fire they had deliberately started. It would have been easy to believe that everyone inside the room had been left without hope. But one extraordinary act of determination changed the outcome for those who still had a chance to survive. Among the victims was 12-year-old Melissa Repass. During the attack, she had been struck by 5 bullets and had lost a significant amount of blood. Her injuries were severe. Every movement would have required immense physical effort. The office around her had become a scene of unimaginable devastation, and the danger had not yet ended because the fire continued to burn. Yet despite those circumstances, Melissa did something remarkable. Rather than remaining where she had fallen, she began moving toward the office telephone. Investigators would later recognize this action as one of the defining moments of the entire case. Crawling across the office despite multiple gunshot wounds required extraordinary determination. Every inch represented a struggle against pain, blood loss, and exhaustion. Nevertheless, she reached the telephone. At approximately 8:30 that morning, only minutes after the attackers had fled, Melissa placed a call to 911. That emergency call would become one of the most significant pieces of the case's history. It alerted emergency responders while there was still time to save lives. Without it, the consequences could have been even more catastrophic. The fire might have spread further through the office. Survivors suffering from gunshot wounds might have remained undiscovered for a much longer period. Investigators have long recognized that Melissa's determination almost certainly prevented additional deaths. Her courage stands in stark contrast to the cruelty that preceded it. In one of the darkest moments imaginable, a severely injured 12-year-old child became the reason emergency assistance reached the scene when it did. The first responders who arrived encountered a scene unlike anything they could have expected at a neighborhood bowling alley. Inside the office lay victims suffering from multiple gunshot wounds, while evidence of the attempted fire remained visible. Emergency personnel immediately began providing medical assistance to those who still showed signs of life. Every second mattered. Some victims had already succumbed to their injuries, while others required immediate transport for advanced medical care. The focus shifted from stopping the crime, which had already ended with the offender's escape, to saving every life that could still be saved. The events inside the office had unfolded with devastating speed. Only a short time earlier, employees had been preparing to welcome customers for another ordinary Saturday. Families throughout Las Cruces were beginning their weekends, unaware that one of the city's most shocking crimes was taking place. By the time emergency vehicles arrived at Las Cruces Bowl, that ordinary morning had been irreversibly transformed into a tragedy that would echo through the community for decades. The physical violence had ended, but its consequences were only beginning. Medical teams worked desperately to treat the wounded, while law enforcement officers faced the enormous task of securing a crime scene that had already been damaged by fire. Investigators would soon begin documenting shell casings, fingerprints, shoe prints, witness statements, and every remaining piece of physical evidence. Yet no amount of evidence could change the irreversible reality inside the office. A robbery involving less than $5,000 had escalated into the deliberate shooting of 7 innocent people, including children. The attackers had attempted to erase their trail with fire before disappearing into the morning, leaving behind a mystery that would endure for more than 3 decades. Amid the destruction, however, one undeniable fact remained. Because a 12-year-old girl, gravely wounded after being shot 5 times, refused to surrender to her injuries and instead crawled to a telephone to call for help. The story of Las Cruces Bowl would not become one in which every victim was silenced. Her extraordinary determination ensured that at least some voices survived to tell investigators what little could still be remembered, preserving the first fragile threads of an investigation that continues to seek answers to this day. When the gunfire finally stopped and the 2 unidentified offenders disappeared from Las Cruces Bowl, the immediate violence was over, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. The office that had served as an ordinary administrative space only minutes earlier had become the center of an unimaginable tragedy. Emergency responders arriving after Militia repassed desperate 911 call were confronted with a scene that reflected both the brutality of the attack and the extraordinary courage that had allowed help to reach the building before it was too late. Their first responsibility was no longer to pursue the attackers, who had already fled, but to determine who could still be saved. Every victim inside the office had suffered gunshot wounds. Some had already died where they fell, while others were still alive despite catastrophic injuries. Medical personnel immediately began providing emergency treatment, understanding that every passing minute could determine whether additional lives would be lost. The attack itself had lasted only a short time, yet the damage it inflicted would extend far beyond that Saturday morning, affecting families, investigators, and the Las Cruces community for decades to come. Among those who did not survive the attack was 26-year-old Stephen Turan. Stephen had begun the morning with the ordinary intention of reporting for work as the bowling alley's mechanic. His decision to bring his daughters with him was born not from unusual circumstances, but from a familiar challenge faced by many working parents. He had been unable to arrange childcare. That routine family decision placed him and his children inside the office during the robbery. Investigators determined that Stephen had unknowingly entered the building while the robbery was already underway, immediately becoming another hostage. His arrival changed the number of people trapped inside the office, but he never had the opportunity to leave. His death represented not only the loss of an employee, but also the loss of a father whose final morning had begun with nothing more extraordinary than trying to balance work and family responsibilities. Also killed during the attack was 13-year-old Amy Hauser. Amy had not come to Las Cruces Bowl because she worked there or because she had any connection to the robbery. She was simply spending time with her friend, 12-year-old Militia Repass. Like countless young teenagers, she expected an ordinary Saturday morning. Instead, she became one of the youngest victims in one of New Mexico's most devastating unsolved crimes. Her death underscored one of the most heartbreaking realities of the massacre. The victims were not selected because of personal conflict or individual circumstances. They became targets simply because they happened to be present when 2 armed men decided to eliminate every witness inside the office. 6-year-old Paula Holwyn also lost her life. Paula had accompanied her father, Stephen Turan, to work because there was no one available to care for her that morning. At 6 years old, she had no understanding of the danger she was walking into when she entered the bowling alley. She had simply followed her father into a place that should have been safe. Her death remains one of the most painful aspects of the case, illustrating the indiscriminate nature of the violence that unfolded inside the office. The presence of children among the victims continues to distinguish the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre from many other robbery-related homicides. 2-year-old Valerie Turan initially survived the shooting and was transported for emergency medical treatment. Despite every effort to save her life, she later died at the hospital as a result of her injuries. Valerie was the youngest victim of the massacre, At only 2 years old, she could neither understand nor respond to the events unfolding around her. Her death became another devastating reminder of how completely innocent the victims were. She had entered the bowling alley only because she was accompanying her father to work. Her entire life had barely begun before it was taken by an act of senseless violence committed by individuals whose identities remain unknown. Stephanie Senak, the 34-year-old day manager, also survived the initial attack and received medical care. As the person responsible for opening the bowling alley that morning, she had been forced to open the safe under the threat of firearm. Investigators determined that she complied with the robbers' demands, surrendering access to the money in hopes of surviving. Although she lived through the immediate attack, the injuries she sustained never truly left her. Nearly a decade later, in 1999, Stephanie died from complications related to the gunshot wounds she suffered during the massacre. Her death raised the total number of fatalities connected to the crime to 5. Even years after the shooting, the consequences of those 15 minutes continued to claim lives, demonstrating that the impact of violent crime cannot always be measured only by what happens on the day it occurs. 2 people ultimately survived the massacre itself: Ida Holwyn and Melissa Repass. Survival, however, did not mean that the tragedy ended for them once they left the hospital. Both women carried with them memories that could never be erased. They had witnessed extraordinary violence inside a room where ordinary work had been taking place. Only moments earlier, they had seen friends, coworkers, and family members become victims of an attack that investigators would later conclude was intended to eliminate every witness. While the supplied evidence focuses primarily on the factual progression of the case rather than their personal experiences afterward, it is impossible to separate survival from the enduring reality that both women remained among the very few people able to provide investigators with direct information about what had occurred inside the office. Melissa Repass occupies a unique place in the history of the case because of what she accomplished. After suffering 5 gunshot wounds, her 911 call did more than summon emergency responders. It altered the outcome of the tragedy itself. Investigators have long recognized that without her determination to crawl to the telephone despite severe injuries and significant blood loss, additional victims may have died before help arrived. Her actions became one of the defining facts remembered whenever the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre is discussed, in a story dominated by cruelty, fear, and loss. Her courage remains one of the few moments that demonstrates extraordinary human resilience. Yet even that remarkable act could not erase the overwhelming grief experienced by those connected. To the victims, the losses extended across multiple families. Stephen Turan and his 2 daughters became victims of the same crime. Paula Holwyn and Ida Holwyn were connected not only through family, but also through the events inside the bowling alley that morning. Stephanie Senak and her daughter Melissa experienced the attack together, with one ultimately losing her life years later while the other survived after displaying extraordinary courage. The massacre did not simply affect isolated individuals. It tore through interconnected families whose lives would never again resemble the ordinary Saturday morning with which the day had begun. Beyond the immediate families, the broader Las Cruces community also confronted the emotional impact of the crime. Las Cruces Bowl had long served as a family recreation center rather than a location associated with violence. The idea that such an attack could occur inside a familiar community gathering place challenged assumptions about safety and normalcy. A business where families expected entertainment instead became associated with one of the state's most infamous unsolved murders. The contrast between the building's intended purpose and the violence committed inside it remains one of the reasons the case continues to resonate decades later. for investigators, the aftermath presented a different kind of burden. Every fatality represented not only a human loss, but also another reason to identify those responsible. 5 people ultimately died. 2 survived with memories that would become vital to the investigation. The attempted arson had damaged the crime scene. The offenders had escaped before police arrived. Yet despite these obstacles, detectives now faced the responsibility of reconstructing every minute of the attack while seeking 2 men who had vanished almost as quickly as they had appeared. Every piece of evidence collected would be examined against the hope that somewhere within the physical traces left behind lay the key to identifying the offenders. As the initial shock gradually gave way to investigation, one painful reality became increasingly clear. The massacre had accomplished far more than the theft of several $1,000s. It had permanently altered the lives of every family connected to the victims, transformed a familiar bowling alley into the site of one of America's most enduring cold cases, and left behind questions that would remain unanswered for more than 3 decades. The names of Stephen Turan, Paula Holguin, Valerie Turan, Amy Hauser, and Stephanie Senak would become forever linked to a crime that has never reached a courtroom. Meanwhile, the survival of Ida Holguin and Melissa Repass ensured that the story would not end in complete silence. Their survival preserved the possibility that one day, however distant that day may be, the investigation might finally uncover the identities of the 2 men who forever changed the lives of everyone inside Las Cruces Bowl on that February morning in 1990. The violence inside Las Cruces Bowl ended within minutes. But for investigators, the work had only just begun. Once emergency personnel had removed the wounded and confirmed the deaths of those who could not be saved, the bowling alley was transformed from an ordinary business into an active crime scene. Every room, every doorway, every object inside the office suddenly became significant. Detectives understood from the outset that the attackers had escaped, leaving behind only the physical evidence they had failed to destroy and the memories of the 2 surviving witnesses. Solving the case would depend entirely on reconstructing the brief but devastating sequence of events that had unfolded between approximately 8:20 and 8:35 on the morning of February 10, 1990. The first challenge facing investigators was preserving what remained of the crime scene. The offenders had not only committed an armed robbery and multiple shootings, but had also attempted to destroy evidence by setting the office on fire before fleeing. The flames had caused substantial damage, though they had not consumed the room completely. This partial destruction presented investigators with a complicated task. Every surviving piece of evidence had to be carefully documented and collected while distinguishing between damage caused by the fire and evidence directly related to the shootings. The attempted arson had not erased the crime scene, but it had undeniably made the investigation far more difficult. Detectives methodically examined the office where all 7 victims had been gathered. Investigators recovered multiple .22 caliber shell casings, confirming the type of weapon used during the attack. The location of the shell casings, together with the victims' injuries, helped reconstruct the sequence of the shootings. According to the investigation, the evidence supported the conclusion that the victims had been shot at close range after being ordered onto the floor. This finding reinforced the belief that the killings were deliberate rather than the result of a chaotic confrontation. The physical evidence matched the accounts later provided by the surviving witnesses, strengthening investigators' confidence in the general timeline of events. Fingerprints became another major focus of the investigation. Crime scene technicians carefully searched the office and surrounding areas, collecting hundreds of prints that might have belonged to the offenders. At first glance, fingerprints appeared to offer a promising path toward identifying the killers. Yet the nature of the location quickly complicated that hope. Las Cruces Bowl was a public business visited by large numbers of employees, customers, vendors, and maintenance workers. Before the attack, countless people had legitimately entered the building and touched doors, counters, office furniture, and other surfaces. As a result, investigators faced the enormous challenge of separating fingerprints connected to the crime from those left during ordinary business operations. The offenders themselves may also have taken precautions to limit the fingerprints they left behind. According to investigators, one reason the case proved so difficult was the possibility that the two men either wore gloves or otherwise minimized the amount of usable evidence available to detectives. Shoe prints also became part of the investigation. Every impression left at the scene represented another opportunity to identify or eliminate potential suspects. Detectives documented these prints alongside the ballistic evidence and fingerprints, hoping that together they would create a clearer picture of the offender's movements inside the building. Like many forms of forensic evidence, however, shoe impressions rarely solve a case by themselves. They become valuable only when connected to a known suspect or additional corroborating evidence. In the absence of identified offenders, the shoe prints remain important but ultimately incomplete pieces of a much larger puzzle. While forensic specialists focused on physical evidence, investigators began interviewing everyone who might possess information about the crime. The scale of the effort quickly became extraordinary. Over time, more than 2,000 people were interviewed as detectives attempted to identify anyone who might have seen suspicious activity before or after the shootings. Employees, acquaintances, local residents, and other individuals connected to the bowling alley or surrounding area became part of the investigation. Every interview represented another possibility that someone had noticed something unusual, however small, that might help identify the two unidentified gunmen. The surviving victims provided the most important eyewitness accounts available to investigators. Although both women had endured extraordinary trauma, their recollections became central to the investigation because they were among the only people who had directly observed the offenders and survived. From their descriptions, detectives developed basic profiles of the two suspects. According to the information provided, the first suspect appeared to be a younger man, possibly in his late 20s or early 30s. He reportedly spoke fluent English. The second suspect appeared noticeably older, perhaps in his late 40s or early 50s. He was described as having a darker complexion and also speaking fluent English. Both men were believed to have Hispanic features. These descriptions became the foundation for countless investigative leads over the years. Yet they also illustrated one of the investigation's greatest frustrations. Although the descriptions narrowed the field somewhat, they remained broad enough that many individuals could potentially match them, without names, photographs, or additional identifying characteristics. Investigators faced an enormous challenge in transforming general descriptions into identifiable suspects. Detectives also examined the robbery itself in an effort to understand the offender's planning. One question quickly emerged: how much did the robbers know about Las Cruces Bowl before entering? The supplied evidence indicates that investigators considered the possibility that the offenders possessed prior knowledge of the business. They appeared to know where the safe was located and committed the robbery before opening hours, when relatively few people would be inside. These observations raised the possibility that at least one offender may have been familiar with the bowling alley's layout or daily routine. Whether that familiarity resulted from previous employment, prior visits, or information obtained from another source has never been established. It remained an investigative theory rather than a proven fact, but it became an important avenue of inquiry as detectives searched for individuals with connections to the business. Another obstacle confronting investigators was the technological limitations of the time. The massacre occurred in 1990, years before modern forensic science reached its current capabilities. DNA analysis existed only in limited forms and could not always provide the detailed results available to investigators decades later. Evidence that might today produce valuable genetic information often could not be fully analyzed at the time of the original investigation. Combined with the damage caused by the attempted fire, these limitations reduced the number of investigative options available during the crucial early stages of the case. Surveillance technology presented another significant difficulty. Unlike many modern businesses equipped with extensive digital camera systems, Las Cruces Bowl did not possess useful surveillance footage capable of documenting the offender's arrival or escape. There were no clear recordings showing their faces, their vehicle, or the direction in which they fled after leaving the building. This absence of visual evidence meant investigators relied heavily on witness testimony and physical evidence rather than video documentation. It also allowed the offenders to disappear into the community without leaving behind the kind of electronic trail that has become common in contemporary criminal investigations. As the investigation expanded, detectives pursued every available lead generated by interviews and physical evidence. Each new tip offered hope that the case might soon be solved. Yet time after time, those leads failed to produce enough evidence to identify or charge any suspect. The sheer number of interviews, more than 2,000, demonstrated the extraordinary commitment devoted to solving the case. Investigators did not limit themselves to a narrow group of individuals. Instead, they explored an enormous range of possible connections, seeking any information capable of explaining who the two men were or where they had gone after leaving the bowling alley. Despite these efforts, the investigation gradually confronted a painful reality. The physical evidence, while substantial, did not point conclusively toward any identifiable offender. Witness descriptions remained too general to produce certain identifications. The attempted arson had damaged important parts of the crime scene. Fingerprints recovered from a busy public business could not easily distinguish innocent visitors from potential offenders. The lack of useful surveillance footage deprived investigators of another crucial investigative tool. Every obstacle compounded the next, transforming what had initially appeared to be a solvable robbery into one of the nation's most enduring cold cases. Yet the investigation did not end simply because immediate answers failed to emerge. Instead, detectives preserved the evidence, documented every interview, and continued reviewing leads as the years passed. The case remained open, not because investigators lacked determination, but because every confirmed fact ultimately led back to the same unanswered question. Two men had entered Las Cruces Bowl on the morning of February 10, 1990. They had committed a robbery, deliberately shot 7 innocent people, attempted to destroy the crime scene with fire, and escaped before police arrived. More than 3 decades later, despite thousands of interviews, extensive forensic examination, and the dedication of generations of investigators, those 2 men remained unidentified. The investigation had uncovered an extraordinary amount about how the crime occurred. Yet the single mystery that mattered most, the identities of the killers, continued to resist every effort to solve it. More than 3 decades after the shootings at Las Cruces Bowl, investigators possess a remarkably detailed understanding of what happened inside the office on the morning of February 10, 1990. They know approximately when the 2 offenders entered the building. They know how the robbery unfolded, how the victims were gathered together, how the money was taken, how the shootings occurred, and how the attackers attempted to destroy evidence by setting the office on fire before fleeing. They also know the identities of every victim, the sequence in which the tragedy developed, and the extraordinary actions taken by 12-year-old Melissa Repass to summon help after suffering multiple gunshot wounds. Yet despite all of this knowledge, one question continues to overshadow every aspect of the investigation. Who were the two men responsible? That unanswered question has transformed the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre into one of the best-known cold cases in the United States. Over the years, investigators have examined multiple possibilities based on the available evidence, but none has produced sufficient proof to identify the offenders or bring criminal charges. The theories that remain part of the investigation are grounded in the evidence collected at the scene and the circumstances surrounding the robbery. But each remains exactly that, a theory rather than a proven conclusion. The primary explanation advanced by investigators is that the crime began as an armed robbery, but escalated into mass murder because the offenders decided to eliminate every witness inside the office. According to this theory, the robbery itself initially followed a recognizable pattern. The two men entered before opening hours, gained control of the employees, forced Stephanie Senak to open the safe, and obtained approximately $4,000 to $5,000, consisting mainly of cash and checks from the previous day's business. At that stage, they had successfully accomplished the apparent objective of stealing money. Had they left immediately afterward, the case would likely have been investigated as a serious armed robbery. Instead, something changed before the offenders escaped. Investigators have focused particular attention on the arrival of Stephen Turan during the robbery. Stephen had not been inside the office when the offenders first entered the building. He arrived afterward, bringing 6-year-old Paula Holwyn and 2-year-old Valerie Turan because he had been unable to arrange childcare. According to the official theory outlined in the supplied evidence, Stephen's unexpected appearance may have altered the offender's thinking. Suddenly, additional witnesses had entered the office. If the offenders feared being identified later, they may have concluded that leaving anyone alive increased the risk of eventual capture. Investigators therefore believe the shootings may have represented a deliberate effort to eliminate every witness before fleeing. This explanation fits several aspects of the known evidence. The robbery had already been completed before the victims were ordered onto the floor. There was no indication that the shootings resulted from resistance or an exchange of gunfire. Instead, the victims were shot at close range, with many wounds concentrated in the head and upper body. Those facts support the conclusion that the violence was intentional rather than accidental. Nevertheless, investigators cannot state with certainty exactly what motivated the offenders because neither man has ever been identified or questioned. Without a confession or additional evidence, the precise reasoning behind their decision remains unknown. Another theory considered during the investigation concerns the offender's apparent familiarity with Las Cruces Bol. Detectives noted several circumstances suggesting that the robbers may have possessed prior knowledge of the business. They entered before opening hours, when relatively few people were expected to be inside. They appear to know that money from the previous day's business would be stored in the safe. They also found the office quickly and forced the manager to open the safe without wasting valuable time searching through the building. These observations led some investigators to question whether the offenders were completely unfamiliar strangers or whether at least one of them possessed previous knowledge of the bowling alley's operations. According to this theory, one or both offenders may have known the location of the safe, understood the schedule followed by employees before opening, or been aware of how many people were likely to be present at that hour. Such knowledge could have come from various sources, including previous employment or familiarity with the business. However, the available evidence does not establish how that knowledge, if it existed, was obtained. Investigators regarded this possibility as an important lead rather than a proven conclusion. Years of investigation have not produced evidence sufficient to confirm that either offender had a documented connection to Las Cruces Bowl. As a result, the theory remains plausible but unverified. A third possibility emerged through some witness information suggesting that additional assistance may have existed outside the building. According to the supplied evidence, certain statements raise the possibility that another individual or a waiting vehicle may have been involved in helping the offenders escape after the shootings. Such a scenario would imply that the two gunmen were not necessarily acting entirely alone. An accomplice waiting nearby could have facilitated a faster escape while allowing the shooters to leave the scene without drawing unnecessary attention. Yet investigators have never located enough evidence to establish that this actually occurred. No confirmed physical evidence has demonstrated the existence of an additional participant. Consequently, the possibility of an accomplice remains another investigative theory rather than an established fact. These three principal theories illustrate an important characteristic of the Las Cruces bowling alley investigation. Detectives have never lacked possible explanations. Instead, they have lacked the evidence necessary to move beyond those explanations and identify specific individuals responsible for the crime. Every theory offers a reasonable interpretation of certain facts while leaving critical questions unanswered. Why did the offenders choose Las Cruces Bowl? How did they acquire whatever knowledge they possessed about the business? Was the decision to kill every witness planned before they entered? Or did it develop during the robbery itself? Did anyone assist them before or after the attack? More than 3 decades later, none of these questions has received a definitive answer. Several practical factors have contributed to the extraordinary difficulty of solving the case. One of the most significant was the offender's attempt to destroy evidence through arson. Although the fire failed to consume the office completely, it nevertheless damaged portions of the crime scene and complicated the recovery of forensic evidence. Every item destroyed or altered by the fire represented a potential clue permanently lost to investigators. Another major obstacle involved the limited state of forensic technology in 1990. Modern criminal investigations frequently benefit from advanced DNA analysis capable of extracting useful information from extremely small biological samples. At the time of the Las Cruces massacre, those technologies were far less developed. Evidence collected at the scene could not always be analyzed to the same standard available decades later. Investigators therefore faced technological limitations that significantly affected the original investigation. The absence of useful surveillance footage also played an important role. Contemporary investigators often reconstruct crimes using extensive camera networks that document offenders arriving, entering buildings, leaving scenes, and traveling afterward. Las Cruces Bowl did not provide investigators with that advantage. Without surveillance images clearly showing the offenders or their means of escape, detectives relied heavily upon eyewitness descriptions and physical evidence recovered from the crime scene. Even the fingerprint evidence collected presented challenges. Hundreds of fingerprints were recovered, but the bowling alley had served countless legitimate visitors before the crime occurred. Distinguishing innocent fingerprints from those potentially left by the offenders proved extraordinarily difficult. Combined with the possibility that the offenders deliberately avoided leaving identifiable prints, this significantly reduced the value of what initially appeared to be one of the strongest forms of evidence. The result of all these obstacles is a case that remains officially unsolved despite extraordinary investigative effort. More than 2,000 interviews have been conducted. Physical evidence has been preserved. The case continues to be reviewed periodically as advances in forensic science create new opportunities to examine older evidence. Law enforcement authorities in Las Cruces have never closed the investigation. Instead, it remains an active cold case, with investigators continuing to encourage anyone possessing information to come forward. Crime Stoppers still offers a reward of $25,000 for information leading to the identification of the two offenders. That continuing reward reflects both hope and frustration. Hope that someone, somewhere, still possesses information capable of solving the case. Frustration that after so many years, the identities of the two men responsible remain hidden behind silence. Every anniversary serves as another reminder that time alone does not resolve unanswered questions. Witnesses grow older, memories fade, communities change. Yet the need for accountability does not disappear simply because decades have passed. For the families of the victims, the passage of time cannot replace justice. The names of Stephen Turan, Paula Holguin, Valerie Turan, Amy Hauser, and Stephanie Senak remain permanently connected to a crime that has never reached a courtroom. Ida Holguin and Melissa Repass survived to tell investigators what they could. But even their courage could not reveal the names of the men who committed the attack. Thus, the Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre continues to occupy a unique place in American criminal history, not because investigators failed to understand what happened, but because despite understanding so much about the crime itself, they have never been able to answer the one question that matters most. Who walked into that bowling alley on the morning of February 10th, 1990, and left behind one of the nation's most enduring unsolved mysteries? More than 3 decades have passed since the events of February 10th, 1990. Yet the Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre continues to occupy a unique place in the history of American criminal investigations. Many notorious crimes eventually move through a familiar sequence. Investigators identify suspects, arrests are made, evidence is presented in court, and judges or juries determine responsibility. Even when the outcome is controversial, the legal process provides a measure of finality. The Las Cruces case has never reached that stage. No one has been arrested. No criminal trial has ever taken place. No jury has heard testimony from the surviving witnesses. No defendant has been required to answer for the deaths of 5 people or the attempted murder of 2 others. As a result, there is no courtroom verdict to conclude this story. Instead, the case remains suspended between the certainty of what happened and the uncertainty of who committed it. From a legal perspective, the absence of identified offenders means there has been no prosecution and no sentencing. The investigation remains an active cold case rather than a closed chapter of criminal history. Law enforcement authorities in Las Cruces continue to preserve the evidence collected in 1990, recognizing that advances in forensic science may someday provide opportunities unavailable during the original investigation. The case is reviewed periodically using modern investigative techniques whenever circumstances allow. This continuing effort reflects an important principle within criminal justice. An unsolved case does not become forgotten simply because many years have passed. As long as evidence exists and investigators remain willing to examine it, the possibility of identifying those responsible continues to exist. However uncertain that possibility may be, public assistance also remains an important part of the investigation. Authorities have repeatedly encouraged anyone with information, no matter how insignificant it may appear, to come forward. Crime Stoppers continues to offer a reward of $25,000 for information leading to the identification of the 2 unidentified offenders. The continued existence of that reward demonstrates that investigators believe someone may still possess knowledge capable of moving the case forward. Whether that information rests with a witness who has never spoken, an acquaintance who failed to recognize the importance of what they knew, or someone who has remained silent for decades, is impossible to determine. Nevertheless, the investigation remains open because the possibility of new information has never been completely exhausted. While the legal process has yet to deliver accountability, The human consequences of the massacre have never disappeared. 5 people ultimately lost their lives as a result of the attack. Stephen Turan died after unknowingly entering the robbery while bringing his daughters to work. Amy Hauser, only 13 years old, never returned home from what should have been an ordinary Saturday morning spent with a friend. 6-year-old Paula Holguin and 2-year-old Valerie Turan became 2 of the youngest victims in one of the most devastating crimes in New Mexico's history. Stephanie Senak survived the initial shooting only to die years later, in 1999, from complications related to the injuries she sustained during the attack, increasing the total number of fatalities to 5. Their deaths represent far more than statistics contained within investigative reports. Each victim left behind family members, friends, co-workers, and loved ones whose lives were permanently changed. The effects of violent crime extend beyond those directly injured. Every loss creates an expanding circle of grief affecting parents, children, siblings, relatives, colleagues, and entire communities. That reality is especially evident in the Las Cruces case because several victims belong to the same family. Stephen Turan lost his life alongside his daughters Paula and Valerie. Stephanie Senak and her daughter Melissa experienced the attack together, with one eventually dying from her injuries while the other survived after displaying extraordinary courage. The emotional impact therefore spread not only across individual families, but through multiple generations connected by relationships that existed long before the crime occurred. The survivors also remind us that survival is not the same as escaping tragedy. Ida Holguin and Melissa Repass lived through the attack, but they carried with them memories of a morning that forever altered their lives. The supplied evidence does not speculate about their later emotional experiences, and it would be inappropriate to invent details that have not been documented. What is known is sufficient on its own. Both women survived an event in which nearly every other person inside the office was shot. Both became essential witnesses in one of America's most famous cold cases. And Melissa's remarkable determination to crawl to a telephone after suffering 5 gunshot wounds remains one of the most extraordinary acts of courage associated with any major criminal investigation in the United States. Her emergency call did not solve the crime, but it saved lives and ensured that the events inside the office would not remain completely unknown. Beyond the individual victims, the massacre profoundly affected the city of Las Cruces itself. Las Cruces Bowl had been a place associated with recreation, family gatherings, and ordinary community life. After February 10, 1990, its name became permanently linked with one of the state's darkest crimes. The contrast between the building's intended purpose and the violence committed inside it continues to make the case particularly disturbing. Crimes occurring in locations already associated with danger often become separated from ordinary experience. This tragedy occurred inside a neighborhood bowling alley preparing to welcome families for another weekend. That reality has remained central to the way the case is remembered. It serves as a painful reminder that extraordinary violence can invade places otherwise defined by normal life. Several aspects of the massacre continue to distinguish it from many other unsolved robberies. The amount of money stolen was relatively small, estimated at approximately $4,000 to $5,000. Yet 7 people were shot after the robbery had already succeeded. 3 of those victims were children, including a 2-year-old girl. According to investigators, the shootings appeared to be deliberate attempts to eliminate witnesses rather than actions necessary to complete the theft. The offenders then attempted to destroy evidence by setting the office on fire before escaping. Each of these facts contributes to the enduring sense of horror surrounding the case. They also explain why the investigation has remained active despite the passage of so many years. The unanswered questions continue to demand attention because of the extraordinary severity of the crime itself. The investigation also illustrates the limits of criminal justice when evidence proves insufficient. To identify offenders, detectives interviewed more than 2,000 people. They collected fingerprints, shoe prints, shell casings, and witness statements. They explored multiple investigative theories, including the possibility that the offenders possessed prior knowledge of the bowling alley or that additional assistance may have existed outside the building. They preserved evidence despite the damage caused by the attempted arson and despite the technological limitations of forensic science in 1990. Yet every effort ultimately returned investigators to the same unresolved question. Knowing how a crime occurred is not always enough to determine who committed it. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre lies not in the mystery surrounding the offenders, but in the resilience demonstrated by those caught within the tragedy. The story is remembered not because of the identities of two unidentified gunmen, but because of the lives interrupted by their actions and the courage displayed by those who refused to surrender. Militia repassed determination to call 911 despite catastrophic injuries continues to symbolize that resilience. Emergency responders, medical personnel, and investigators each played their roles in responding to circumstances that no community ever wishes to confront. Their efforts ensured that the victims would not simply become forgotten names within an unsolved case file. Today, the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre remains one of the most significant cold cases in the United States. Investigators continue reviewing evidence as forensic science advances. Law enforcement officials continue encouraging witnesses to come forward. The reward offered through Crime Stoppers remains available for information leading to the identification of the two offenders. Hope, although tested by time, has never disappeared completely. Someone may still possess the missing piece of information capable of transforming decades of unanswered questions into a solved case. Until that day arrives, the legacy of February 10th, 1990, rests not only in the mystery surrounding two unidentified men, but also in the memory of 5 lives lost. 2 survivors whose courage became part of American criminal history, and a community that continues to wait for justice. The passage of more than 36 years has changed countless aspects of the world, but it has not changed the fundamental truth at the heart of this case. A family bowling alley became the scene of unimaginable violence. Innocent people lost their lives for less than $5,000. A 12-year-old girl refused to give up even after being shot 5 times, making the call that saved others. And somewhere beyond the pages of investigative files and the memories of those who lived through that morning, the identities of the 2 men responsible remain unknown, until those names are finally discovered and supported by evidence capable of bringing them before a court of law. The Las Cruces bowling alley massacre will continue to stand as both a profound tragedy and one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. More than 3 decades after the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre, the case continues to remind investigators, historians, and ordinary citizens that some of the most haunting crimes are not necessarily those with the most complicated motives, but those whose senselessness defies explanation. On the morning of February 10th, 1990, an armed robbery that resulted in the theft of approximately $4,000 to $5,000 escalated into the deliberate shooting of 7 innocent people inside the office of a family bowling alley. 5 of those victims ultimately lost their lives. The offenders attempted to erase evidence by setting the office on fire before disappearing, leaving behind a crime scene that investigators have examined for decades without identifying the 2 men responsible. The facts themselves remain devastating enough that they require no embellishment. The tragedy is measured not by mystery alone, but by the ordinary lives that were interrupted forever. Looking back across the timeline of the case, one of its most striking characteristics is how ordinary every decision made by the victims had been. Stephanie Senak reported for work because she was responsible for opening the bowling alley. Ida Holwyn arrived to prepare food before customers entered the building. Stephen Turan came to perform his duties as the mechanic, bringing his daughters because childcare was unavailable. Melissa Repass accompanied her mother, while Amy Hauser spent time with her friend on a Saturday morning. None of those choices were unusual. They reflected the routines repeated by countless families every day. Yet ordinary decisions sometimes intersect with extraordinary circumstances. And on that morning, those routines brought 7 innocent people together inside one office at precisely the moment 2 armed men entered through an unlocked door. The contrast between normal life and sudden violence continues to shape how the massacre is remembered. Las Cruces Bowl was not a location associated with conflict or criminal activity. It was a place designed for recreation, family gatherings, and community events. Parents brought children there to enjoy weekends together. Friends met there for games and celebrations. Employees prepared the building each morning so that customers could spend time in an atmosphere intended to be welcoming and familiar. That such a place became the setting for one of the most notorious unsolved mass murders in New Mexico history remains deeply unsettling. The location itself reminds us that violence is not confined to places already associated with danger. It can invade environments built around ordinary human connection, leaving communities struggling to reconcile familiar spaces with unimaginable events. Another lasting lesson emerges from the remarkable courage displayed by 12-year-old Melissa Repass. According to the known facts of the case, she suffered 5 gunshot wounds and lost a significant amount of blood. Despite those injuries, she crawled to the office telephone and called 911 at approximately 8:30 that morning. Her actions became one of the defining moments of the entire investigation. Without that call, emergency responders may not have arrived in time to assist those who still had a chance to survive. The investigation has long recognized that her determination almost certainly prevented even greater loss of life. It is important to remember that courage does not erase tragedy. Melissa could not prevent the robbery. She could not stop the shooting. She could not identify the offenders by name. Yet within circumstances completely beyond her control, she made a decision that demonstrated extraordinary resilience. Her actions continue to represent the strongest example of hope within a story otherwise dominated by violence and loss. The investigation itself offers another important perspective. More than 2,000 interviews were conducted. Detectives collected fingerprints, shoe impressions, shell casings, witness descriptions, and other physical evidence. They examined multiple theories concerning the offender's possible familiarity with a bowling alley. The possibility that Stephen Turan's unexpected arrival influenced the decision to kill every witness, and the suggestion that additional assistance may have been waiting outside. Every available lead received attention. Every significant piece of evidence was preserved. Yet despite those efforts, investigators have never obtained sufficient evidence to identify the 2 offenders or present a case before a court. This reality illustrates one of the most difficult truths within criminal investigations. Dedication, professionalism, and determination cannot always overcome the limitations imposed by damaged evidence, unavailable technology, or the passage of time. The attempted arson destroyed part of the crime scene. Forensic science in 1990 lacked many of the capabilities available today. Useful surveillance footage did not exist. Witness descriptions, while valuable, remained too general to identify specific individuals. Each obstacle alone might have been manageable. Combined together, they created one of the most challenging cold cases in modern American history. Nevertheless, the investigation has never been abandoned. Evidence continues to be preserved and reviewed as forensic methods improve. Law enforcement authorities continue encouraging members of the public to provide information. Crime Stoppers continues offering a reward for information leading to the identification of the offenders. These continuing efforts reflect an enduring commitment to justice regardless of how much time has passed. Cold cases often remind us that the passage of years does not erase responsibility. An unsolved crime remains unsolved until evidence provides an answer. Equally important is the way the case encourages us to remember the victims not solely through the circumstances of their deaths, but through the ordinary lives they lived before violence interrupted them. Stephen Turan was a mechanic arriving for work. Stephanie Senak was a manager preparing to open the business. Ida Holwyn worked as the cook. Amy Hauser was a 13-year-old girl spending time with a friend. Paula Holwyn was 6 years old. Valerie Turan was only 2. Melissa Repass was 12 years old when she displayed extraordinary courage that would later become part of American criminal history. Their identities extend beyond the tragedy itself. They were family members, co-workers, parents, daughters, and friends whose lives possessed meaning long before February 10th, 1990. Remembering them in that broader context preserves the humanity that violent crime too often threatens to overshadow. There is also an important ethical lesson in how cases like this are discussed. Public fascination with unsolved crimes frequently centers on offenders, speculation, and mystery. Yet the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre demonstrates why responsible storytelling should place victims at the center rather than those who committed the violence. The identities of the offenders remain unknown. Their motives can only be discussed within the limits supported by available evidence. The victims, by contrast, are known. Their names, their ages, and the circumstances that brought them together that morning have been carefully documented. Focusing on their experiences rather than glorifying unidentified perpetrators ensures that the story remains grounded in compassion rather than sensationalism. The absence of a court-true verdict also leaves an unusual ending. Most criminal cases conclude with convictions, acquittals, or dismissed charges. This one concludes with uncertainty. There has been no trial because no suspect has been identified. There has been no sentence because no defendant has stood before a judge. Justice, in the formal legal sense, remains incomplete. Yet the continuing investigation reflects society's refusal to accept that unanswered questions should simply be forgotten. As long as the evidence survives and investigators continue their work, the possibility of accountability remains alive, however distant it may appear. Today, the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre stands as one of the most enduring cold cases in the United States, not only because investigators still seek 2 unidentified men, but because the crime itself challenged fundamental assumptions about safety, community, and ordinary life. It reminds us how quickly routine can become tragedy, how courage can emerge even under unimaginable circumstances, and how the search for justice sometimes extends across generations. More than 36 years have passed since that Saturday morning, but the essential facts remain unchanged. An armed robbery for less than $5,000 escalated into the deliberate shooting of 7 innocent people. 5 ultimately lost their lives. 2 survived. A 12-year-old girl's determination to call 911 became one of the most courageous acts associated with any American criminal investigation. And despite decades of investigative work, thousands of interviews, preserved evidence, and continuing public appeals, the identities of the 2 offenders remain unknown. Until that final question is answered through credible evidence and lawful prosecution, the story of the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre remains unfinished. not because the events of that morning are unclear, but because justice continues to wait for the names of the men who carried out one of the most heartbreaking unsolved crimes in American history. The story of the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre ultimately leaves us with two parallel realities that exist side by side. One is built upon certainty. Investigators know where the crime occurred, approximately when it unfolded, how the robbery developed, how the victims were gathered inside the office, how the money was taken, how the shootings were carried out, and how the offenders attempted to destroy evidence before escaping. They know the names and ages of every victim. They know that approximately $4,000 to $5,000 was stolen. They know that 7 innocent people were shot, that 5 ultimately lost their lives, and that 2 survived. They know that 12-year-old Melissa Repass, despite suffering 5 gunshot wounds, managed to crawl to a telephone and place a 911 call that almost certainly saved additional lives. These facts have remained consistent throughout decades of investigation. The second reality, however, is built almost entirely upon absence. Investigators still do not know the identities of the 2 men who entered Las Cruces Bowl that morning. They cannot explain with certainty why the robbery escalated into the execution of witnesses. They cannot prove whether the offenders had previous knowledge of the bowling alley, whether they acted entirely alone, or where they went immediately after leaving the building. Those unanswered questions have transformed the case into one of America's most enduring cold cases, reminding us that even determined investigations supported by substantial physical evidence cannot always overcome every obstacle. Perhaps that contrast between certainty and uncertainty explains why the massacre continues to resonate so deeply after more than 3 decades. The known facts are heartbreaking enough on their own. A family entertainment center preparing to open for business became the setting for extraordinary violence. Employees performing ordinary morning routines suddenly found themselves confronting armed robbers. Children who should have been thinking about nothing more serious than spending time with family or friends instead became victims of a crime they could neither understand nor escape. The amount of money taken was relatively small compared with the magnitude of the suffering left behind. The value of approximately $4,000 to $5,000 can be calculated easily. The value of 5 human lives, the trauma carried by 2 survivors, and the grief experienced by multiple families cannot. Every anniversary of February 10th serves as another reminder that the consequences of violent crime extend far beyond the moment in which it occurs. Families continue living with empty places at gatherings that once included loved ones. Friends continue remembering people who never had the opportunity to grow older. A community continues carrying the memory of an event that forever altered the reputation of a familiar neighborhood business. Time changes many things, but it does not erase loss, nor does it diminish the importance of continuing to seek accountability whenever justice remains unfinished. The story also offers an important reflection on courage. Throughout history, acts of bravery are often associated with trained professionals facing obvious danger. Yet courage frequently emerges from ordinary people confronted by extraordinary circumstances they never chose. Melissa Repass was only 12 years old when she was forced into such a moment. After suffering multiple gunshot wounds and losing significant amounts of blood, she somehow found the strength to crawl across the office and reach the telephone. She did not know whether help would arrive in time. She could not know whether the offenders might return. She simply acted because action was still possible. Her emergency call became one of the defining facts of the investigation and remains one of the most remarkable examples of determination associated with any major criminal case in the United States. Her actions remind us that heroism is often measured not by the absence of fear or injury, but by the decision to continue despite both. The investigation itself demonstrates another form of perseverance. More than 2,000 interviews were conducted. Detectives collected fingerprints, shoe impressions, shell casings, and witness statements. They explored every major investigative theory, supported by the available evidence. They preserved the case despite technological limitations, despite damage caused by the attempted arson, and despite the passage of decades without identifying the offenders. Each generation of investigators inherited responsibility for a crime committed before many current officers had even begun their careers. The continued review of evidence reflects a broader commitment within law enforcement that the pursuit of justice does not expire simply because immediate answers prove elusive. Cold cases remain active expressions of that commitment. Every advance in forensic science creates another opportunity to re-examine evidence collected years earlier. Every new witness who chooses to speak creates another possibility that the investigation may one day reach the breakthrough it has long sought. The case also reminds us why responsible discussions of true crime must remain centered upon victims rather than offenders. The unidentified gunmen remain anonymous not because they deserve mystery or fascination, but because investigators have not yet gathered sufficient evidence to identify them. Their anonymity should never become the most compelling aspect of the story. Instead, attention belongs with those whose lives were forever altered by their actions. Stephen Turan arrived for work while trying to balance employment with fatherhood. Stephanie Senak fulfilled her responsibilities as the day manager. Ida Holwyn came to prepare food before opening. Amy Hauser spent time with her friend. Paula Holwyn and Valerie Turan were children accompanying family members. Melissa Repass displayed extraordinary courage under circumstances almost impossible to imagine. Remembering these individuals as people rather than simply victims restores the humanity that violent crime attempts to erase. Even today, the investigation continues, encouraging members of the public to come forward with information. Crime Stoppers still offers a reward for information leading to the identification of the offenders. That continuing appeal reflects hope rather than certainty. Investigators cannot promise that the case will be solved. They cannot predict when, or even if, the missing answers will emerge. But they also refuse to conclude that the search should end while possibilities remain. History contains numerous examples of cold cases solved many years after the crimes occurred through advances in forensic science or the willingness of witnesses to provide long-withheld information. The Las Cruces bowling alley massacre remains open because investigators continue believing that justice, however delayed, is still worth pursuing. Ultimately, this case asks us to remember more than the mystery. It asks us to remember the cost of violence measured not only in lives lost, but in futures interrupted. It asks us to recognize that ordinary mornings can change forever within moments. It asks us to appreciate the resilience demonstrated by survivors and first responders who confronted unimaginable circumstances. And it asks us to understand that justice is not defined solely by convictions already achieved, but also by the determination to continue searching for truth when answers remain hidden. More than 36 years have passed since the morning of February 10th, 1990. The bowling alley, the office, the evidence, and investigative files have become part of American criminal history. Yet behind every document, every photograph, and every piece of forensic evidence stand real people whose lives cannot be reduced to headlines or statistics. 5 individuals ultimately died because 2 unidentified men chose to transform a robbery into an act of deliberate execution. 2 others survived through extraordinary determination and the rapid response made possible by a courageous emergency call. The investigation continues. The reward remains available. And the hope for accountability has not disappeared. Until credible evidence finally identifies the two offenders and allows the justice system to do its work. The Las Cruces bowling alley massacre will remain one of the nation's most haunting unsolved crimes, not simply because the perpetrators remain unknown, but because the memories of the victims continue to deserve the truth that has remained just beyond reach for more than 3 decades.